I mean, these are really important. If someone has mental disorders or challenges and they're disassociation or they're autistic, it's really important to see these cycles, see how they're playing out, to see where the turning points are and what would be useful for them at these phases. A lot of times people can be really stigmatized when their mind starts going back before this lifetime and not making relevance out of the things that are happening forward in their life. It's supposed to be frustrating for parents, partners, whatever. Then it's going to be a point when it goes direct. So 22 to 23, let's say 5, 10, so maybe in their 30s, it goes direct. Then it starts going direct and they start it starts trying to get forward. They're trying to catch up to get to the starting point again. They're trying to think they're still way back in their lifetime trying to catch up and get out of that start. They've got that information. They got to use that information, come forward until Mercury gets back to its own natal position again for the third time. When it gets back to its position for the third time, you make sense of things and you start moving forward there. So that's really the new beginning in terms of across a lifetime. And then it goes forward and really you finish the whole Mercury retrograde say when it gets back to its own place, and then it starts going forward and you're clearly here. Like this is like over lifetimes, this is see, well, when you're dealing with it in transits, this is 22 days, 10 days, 22 days. We don't live that, we do live that deeply, but we're not going to follow it that deeply with the Mercury's retrograde. Nobody's thinking right. They're going back to disassociating, but whenever Mercury is retrograde, it's always closest to the sun. It's very powerful thinking. But because it's closest to the sun, it empowers the thinking, but it takes it away from the shadow or from the outside of things. So, and everybody gets empowered and gets disoriented from it. But when it's happening in your chart, this is really a personalized thing. I just made some examples of how to work through it to see through this. Here someone's born with a Mercury, it's still going direct, but it's slowing down. It's starting to go a degree and a half or a degree a day. It's starting to slow down into this period. And then maybe at 5 or 7, between 5 and 10, or sometime in those early years, Mercury goes retrograde in their early school years. They go forward and they run into something, and then the mind starts backing off and going back over what already happened. That's how I was taught the thought. How come it's like this? How come it's like this? It doesn't make sense to me. It does. And as you're taking that as time that's being taken to reflect or go in or reassess, that's not just going forward saying, yes, 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 I'm doing this, I'm going. So when you're competing with other people, this is a challenge through this period. So that can happen. So that means that 22 years later, 5, 6 years time, 27, 28, 26 starts to go direct again. And the first 30 years of your life, you're wondering, where was that? I was living in another world. I'm going to make it different. I'm going to change it different. And I'm going to start building up. Your thoughts start aligning differently from now. Now, when you get positive influences and inspiring or good teachings, or either spiritual teachings or good teachings at these points, it really pivotally changes your consciousness and the way you live your life. But at the same time, if you don't and you get negative influences coming back, the shadow or the negative thinking can be reestablishing itself again, and that's the negative side of this, if it goes that way. You can't presume, you're hoping it's not, you're presuming it's not, but someone can get stuck, in which case you're having to work back and forth with this was here, this was, you can take the past experience and keep justifying why they need to get more positive and why you have to use that to reinforce the forward moving Mercury until it finally gets past its pause point and it starts going forward free and unfettered again, at least unfettered by this. Now remember, while this is going on, there's going to be aspects going on, and that means there's going to be some aspects that hit 1, 2 or 3 times that have to be rethought. So here's an example of someone with Mercury retrograde. They're born with Mercury, born here in the cycle. Mercury's retrograde. So their Mercury's retrograde. Here they are, my Mercury's retrograde. In natal chart, people say, oh, Mercury's retrograde, you're not thinking right, it's not wrong. With your natal chart, you still have to use Mercury in the sign it's in and it's a house it's in. It doesn't matter. The retrograde it impedes. It's not needed to be thought about. It's tending to make it more negative than it is. In the progressions, the alertness comes in. How come you went that way, but it didn't go as far as other people? Or how come this you begin to see this Mercury retrograde period? It goes back up into things before this lifetime. You're here, but you're still trying to make sense of the things based on what happened the last time, which you may or may not remember. Probably don't. So it's like a confusion or puzzle. You're trying to assess things, and it goes back as far as it can possibly go back. This can be anywhere in your first 20 years. If you're starting retrograde, it can happen just as it could be just your home life till you're getting out to school. Oh my goodness, what was I doing there? And then it takes you another summer years to get your thoughts. You meet a good teacher, meet someone, it starts to get you thinking in a different way, start going forward till it gets back to its own position. In this case, it would get back to its own position about 25 to 30. And then it's still another 5 or 7 years before it gets to the completion point, even though the starting point was before the birth, and the retrograde point was before the birth, before you're born, your mind's going back to rethink things to get back to the starting point and then going forward again till it gets past this. When retrograde before you, like these are all prenatal things. You could say, what was my mother doing at these times? They would be influences in your prenatal chart, or in your before birth chart, affecting the fetus, affecting the thoughts and the psyche of the mom, stuff like that. Whoa, comes in, comes back. You're going back thinking, overcome it, finally getting free of this cycle and moving on with it. But a lot of depth is gathered by reassessing 3 times. In one way, it looks like it's a hang-up. You're slow, you're going over these things. What's with this? Another way, you're getting to know this section of the zodiac and this section of your chart really well. Of course, that can be accentuated or more debilitating depending on what aspects are made within this. There's a certain fated thing with progression. I get the progressions, they make these profound insights, but they're very fated because, wow, how come I got this and not that? Like, but is it true to have to work through this? And we start to see this. So, okay, here's someone, Mercury is born, Mercury is retrograde, but it's just starting to slow down and it's going to go direct in the first 4 or 5 years of their life. And it goes direct and it's just going straight forward. But there's still a point here in this going straight forward that's with the parents, it's tied up to the Mercury retrograde, the one at starting point, ending point, which is across 20 days from birth, before birth, or 40 days before birth, or by progression 40 years before birth. Oh, like, what's it going back to? So, but you get back to, there's still a starting point where before you're really thinking on your own clearly, before even though you haven't experienced this period, this phase, it's still there and acts as a bit of a shadow or a double thinking as you're going through this until you get past this point, you culminate your thinking, and then it starts to get simpler, you start going forward more clearly, one sign at a time, just simply. Not reflecting it. It's a tremendous change in the texture of your thinking and your interpretation of life. Okay, so suddenly someone's born right at the stationary direct. They don't have any of them. It's stationary direct. Oh, it's just going direct. It's just, you would just have Mercury as direct. But it's in the stationary direct period. It's still in this slow-moving period where there's profound fixed influence, or it can be hard to fix, but a profound influence for this whole degree, as long as it's in this degree, in this phase. Then it begins to move forward faster, and goes forward. But there's still this completion point that would come up about 15 in the teenage years. I just made a bunch of examples. So here's where Mercury is past the whole loop of the retrograde, past the stationary, it's out of that stationary direct period, and it's just still slow, but it's just starting to gather speed before it's going direct. For that person, Mercury may be direct their whole lifetime, but that first period, that first phase, is still some unconsciously or subliminally connected to what was going on before you were born. Like a ghost or a shadow or an extra concern or a mentor or something's thinking or some complex or something you thought of or you didn't deal with, or you made decisions or judgments in another lifetime you hadn't, and you're still coming in and it's still having an effect on you. But this is far less dramatic than the previous ones, but it's someone could have the Mercury just after, in the same degree, just after the station direct, just before it, or way before it, where it's just going direct and still tied into this same, these it has 3 different processes of how they're going to go through their life, 3 different timings of how they're thinking and how their thinking is going to evolve. And while you're thinking about all these things inside, are you really reflecting on your heart? Are you letting your heart think, or you're caught up with what's more important, what you're having to measure? So there's some Mercury's direct, but it's direct, it's going for it. It's still got 5 or 6 years before that completion point. That may be just getting out of the house and out of the family and getting to school and being able to think for yourself for once. Your experiences will define how this works. Each person's will still find it. Everybody's going to be different in how they do different things. Nobody's exactly the same, but you'll see these patterns. And once you put the experiences against these patterns, it starts to explain a lot of things in life. About your mental development. And I think then someone can be born right here, right at the degree that Mercury went retrograded. You know, days, a month before you're born, a month or so before you're born. You know, but you're still being born and still connected back there. So things that happen to your family, to your mom and dad, or during your pregnancy or something, you know, like if she was reading Dracula or any spooky stories at that time, maybe those spooky stories came in and affected them, and it came in. But you're born into that. You're not connected to it, but it's still there in your starting point. The need to go back, but you're going forward. So you're going forward. You're not necessarily going to have everyone connected to you. It's just this is a harder thing to describe. I don't know how to describe it. It's just, but each one very, very different approaches to life, approaches to thinking. Very different textures, you know, depending on where you're born in your cycle, where it starts for you. So this is where we start looking at the uniqueness of Mercury progressions and how it works for each of us and where it goes and where it comes. And I mean, these things, you can't just look and say, oh, this happened here, this happened here, oh, there's Mercury, there's Mercury. But no, you got to slow it down, and you got to take some time to work on this, to make the associations, to see the patterns, to reflect on the implications. And it's like a good story that you hear once and you hear it 10 years later and you understand it better, and 10 years later you understand it better. This is how these things work. Okay, so now I've just made an example of, I put the ascendant. Say, well, Mercury is going in the ascendant's in this zone. So your Mercury is going direct. It hits the starting point, invisibly so, seemingly, unless you look at this when it goes direct and what degree that was forced to recognize where the starting point is. But in progressions, that's where your Mercury would start in this. But if your Mercury starts in the 12th house, in the shadow, it may get to the starting point, it may be past the starting point, but it's going to come up and hit the ascendant, and then come out of the shadow of the 12th house into the 1st house, and start being projected a little bit more. You're going forward, you're thinking forward, you're thinking, going forward, you're thinking, then Mercury goes retrograde 10, 15 years later, or 8 to 10 years later, and then goes retrograde, slows down, goes right, backs up, goes right back on your ascendant again when you're really thinking strongly again, but differently than the first time. And then it goes back into your 12th house of insecurity until it goes direct, goes back as far as it can, then goes direct, it comes back. So you might have 15 years where you might have got out of the family and started writing, and then finally you stopped writing for 10 years, then finally, by the time Mercury hits you, then you start writing again. Or reading or thinking for yourself. Simple little thing, very powerful implications in the terms of a life.